welcome back to another exciting episode of Shop Talk. I'm your host, Steve Klink, and with me always is my partner in crime, Chris Mills. Today we have another co-host to add to our roster. We loved having her as a guest, and the next thing we knew, we were discussing future episodes. Welcome to the show, Debbie Hutchins.
Hello.
Hey, Debbie. How you doing today?
Great. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey,
Awesome. Good to have you back.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you back. So with that, we're going to get on to the subject of today's episode, which is inclusion. This is a subject that was raised during one of our other episodes that we just recently recorded that we felt it needed its own episode to explore. So with that, it's time to introduce our panel today. Debbie, why don't you get us started?
All right. Our first guest today is Alyssa Roz, who is a non-binary live audio technician who specializes in doing monitors. With more than 10 years experience in live audio, Roz has worked as front of house and monitors, both locally in Toronto and touring. They're the TD of the Mod Club in downtown Toronto and the digital live sound instructor at Harris Institute. In their spare time, Roz works to create a healthy and supportive technical community that encourages positive, inclusive work environments, active learning, and mentorship opportunities for women and people of color. Welcome, Roz. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the show, Ross. Our next guest is Katie McKay Brooker, who is a lighting designer and production manager. Katie has been working for over 30 years professionally across 3 continents in the live entertainment industry as a lighting and visual specialist and production manager. Some career highlights include Bryan Adams, The Rankins, Drum, The 10 Tenors, Potted Potter, Cavendish Beach Music Festival, and many, many more. She hails from Ontario and has made Nova Scotia her home for the past 15 years. Katie is parent to 3 boys ranging from 14 to 20 years of age. She went to Humber College's technical theater program after falling in love with theater while in high school. She was also nominated for a Juno Award for the Music DVD of the Year in 2010. Great to have you here, Katie. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. So we're going to go to Debbie now for our next guest.
So moving on to our next guest, we have Pauline Blackwood. Pauline's been working in audio for 30 years. She worked at Westbury National Show Systems in Toronto, a very reputable production company, for 25 years. She's now freelancing. She's done a lot of gigs in corporate AV, live events, community events. She's volunteered at Girls Rock Toronto. She's the former co-chapter head of Sound Girls, the Toronto chapter. And I have a story. Pauline and I met at Westbury when I was quite a young girl, just starting out in the industry, and we hit it off right then. So it's great to have her on here today. Pauline, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Great
Thanks.
to see you again, Pauline.
Hey, Steve. How you doing?
Good, good.
Hi, Alyssa. Hi, Adrian.
Okay, and our last guest, please, Debbie, if you could do the honors.
Well, it's our good friend, Adrian Sterling, who does everything you could ever want someone to do at a pop show. Currently, he's working at Solotech as an audio crew chief, but of course, he worked at PA Plus back in the good old days. He's done everything in audio from rock, corporate shows, and everything else in between. He started doing audio in the church community in his early days and has had several managerial roles as well as being a technician. Hey, Adrian, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing quite well. It's great to be here. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Adrian. Now that we've all been introduced, I thought it might be interesting to kick things off, just hearing from some of you on what you feel the term inclusion really means to you when thinking about this on a daily basis. I would imagine that everybody probably has a different definition of this. So would anybody like to start us off for this?
Sure, why not? Inclusion is normal. It should be normal that any person who is visibly different or otherwise should be able to just go about their day doing normal things without any worry about physical threat to themselves or people mocking them. It should be just everybody should be able to get along their day as a normal person.
Okay.
Just maybe not having to think about inclusion, I think, would be the best definition of inclusion. Like the day we could actually all go to wherever we're going, work, school, take your daughter to the park, whatever you're doing, that it just be you're doing it and not having to think about what people are thinking about you, or you thinking strange things about other people, but just, not thinking about inclusion, I think, is the optimal goal of working towards inclusion, I think.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those issues that should be a non-issue, actually.
Yeah,
Should be.
I agree that it'd be something that should be normal and something we don't have to think about, and that we should all just be able to go about our lives and be included in the workplace and feel a part of the team and not feel separate. But I think right now it's almost important for us to be conscious of it, especially if you're in the position of hiring or if you're in a position of control. I think being very conscious of inclusion is really important right now.
I think it's important to feel safe whether you're out and about or you walk onto a work site, that you don't feel uncomfortable or threatened or excluded from whatever environment that you're working in.
Okay. Debbie, you want to throw in a question here?
So did any of you face inclusivity barriers such as racism, sexism, or discrimination when you first started out in the industry? And what was that experience like for you?
I experienced it both subtly and also where it's like right in my face when I first started in the industry. Because when I started out, there weren't that many people of color working in the industry. I did, and so I had the people I worked with weren't exposed to working with people of color as much as working with other with people. So yeah, I experienced it a bit when I was first starting out.
Okay.
I think with me, I like the word that Pauline used, subtle, because there's always a lot of, or I should say always was at the time when I was just starting out, a lot of subtle references that you were just expected to let roll. And for me, I had a few things that I didn't feel included in, whereas I was, not only am I a person of color, I'm Black, but I was also very young when I started full-time in a production environment. And I was also from a church background, which was not very normal for that production environment here in Toronto. So the things that I kind of had to, I guess now that I look back at it, there were quite a few things that I had tried to keep under wraps or hide. And, oh, well, let's not, if I'm playing some music to check the PA, let's make sure the music's not too Black, or let's make sure the music's, not any churchy music, which is some of the music I grew up with, or let me pick some maybe older classic rock because I'm a young guy, but I don't want to give off the impression of being a young guy. So I want to give off the impression of being somebody that's been around and more experienced. So maybe I need to move that to my selections as well. And just certain things like that, where at the time, obviously you are thinking about it and you're making those choices, but you're not really necessarily realizing that you're making choices to kind of hide who you are to fit into what the mold is supposed to be.
Yeah, I can totally agree with that. Something that I learned really early on was kind of how to adapt. Though I'm non-binary, a lot of the experiences that I'll be talking about are kind of from the point of view as a woman, which is sort of my experience getting into everything. And I definitely learned how to like tone down any femininity that I had, because it was sort of looked down upon to be feminine in anything. I often heard women being mocked behind their back for wearing makeup on gigs. And as you said, some of the discrimination or just kind of the negativity around it is very subtle. But then being a female sound tech, being very young when I started, some of it was way more obvious, like just blatant sexual assault or rape from technicians. So yes, there's a lot of subtlety, but behind the scenes, there's some pretty blatant discrimination.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'd really wish that we had a chance to maybe talk before the Roz, because we actually did an episode on women in audiovisual just before this one, and to say the least, we got a really positive feedback from the majority of our guests, but only because they didn't really want to focus on some of the more negative things. So it's kind of interesting to hear some of that.
We all had agreed on anyways that we wanted to do another episode on the subject, because we hardly covered enough ground, to do it justice. Let's put it this way. There's a lot more to explore and a lot more stories to hear. So yeah, I'll just extend an open invitation to anyone present here who wants to take part in basically part 2 of Women in the Industry. You're all welcome. And also I'll extend an invitation to anybody who wants to contribute in any way by suggesting subjects, or even suggesting an idea for a show or something we should do. Because this channel is pretty new still, and we're still building it, so we're still looking for a whole bunch of collaborators, but we want to make it something meaningful for all of us in the industry, something that actually is not there, that we all can relate to, and that'll all help us understand each other better. I think that's really important, because we're all about teamwork, and the better we understand each other, the better we can kind of work together.
We've been really lucky with our guests, and you guys included, for the fact that some of the discussions that we've had have actually led to other episodes, and that's a real blessing for us. But we know that at some point probably that well would become dry, which is exactly like, to echo what Chris said. We want to have as many ideas as possible for the channel and such. But back more to the task at hand here, as far as what we're talking about, and that is as you feel now within in our industry, do you feel that the workforce is moving more towards like an inclusive community now in comparison to when you all started out? Would one of you like to take that on, just to answer that?
I'd like to say that I have a slightly different perspective, because I did the first 20 years as a male. So I didn't really have to deal with the issues we're talking about today until the last several years. But I have seen where, say 10 years ago on tour with a big show, there'd be a person like myself, transgender in some way, on the job site, and nobody wanted to deal with them. Whereas my experience for myself has been that there's a sticker shock value a lot of times, but it's less and less. And more and more often, I usually say I have them won over by coffee. That by coffee, it's not, who is that? Is that a male or a female? It's, oh, that's Kate. She's that person. That's it. So it's just by being me makes it easier for others, and especially the recurring tours where I come back to a venue and it's old home week again. It's like I was when I was a male, touring over and over again.
Wow. Okay. Would anyone else like to possibly take a crack at that?
Yeah. One thing that I've been really inspired by, I'm super happy to see in the last few years, I'd say maybe 5 years or so, the amount of what I'll call allies in the industry who are really actively looking out for folks and giving them opportunities that they normally wouldn't have has definitely increased. When I started in the industry, there weren't a lot of women. It took me years of my career to actually meet a female Santec. And then slowly as my career went on in the last 5 years, I've noticed more, cis white men in the industry actually making a conscious effort to either give mentorship opportunities to women or folks of color, or just outright hire. The entire reason that I'm now the technical director of the Mod Club is because Stecky, who was the TD before me, was actively trying to hire women at the Mod Club because it was predominantly men for so long. So it's people like that that I'm seeing more and more of over the last few years that have really sort of given me hope. Yeah.
Well, that's really good to hear. I'd like to think that things are changing for the better, but I mean, that's exactly why we have all of you on, to kind of tell us the truth of things a little bit, because, I'm not going to lie and say that I have a ton of experience or anything like that. I'm shocked and really disappointed to hear your comments, Katie, as far as, just being looked upon as far as, or people that you knew of that were, going through transitions, being looked upon as like, I don't want to deal with you. Mm-hmm. That just lacks such humanity as far as that's concerned. Like at the end of the day, no matter, what you feel or who you identify as, we're all still people. And that's the one thing I really wish that people would get.
Steve, the thing is, I've observed that behavior that Katie described, that people that just don't want to deal with somebody that they can't fit into their boxes. They just don't feel comfortable with them. They don't know how to approach them, or even, what words to use, how to address them properly. They just feel so insecure that they'd rather just back off and not deal with them at all than to make a fool of themselves, by assuming a gender or using the wrong pronouns or whatever. Some people are that way, so they'd rather just avoid the whole situation and have somebody else deal with them. It's sad, but I've seen it happen.
That's not there should be education towards this as a whole. I would think anyways, for anybody that's in a supervisory position, especially, so that we can get the best work possible out of the people that we work with. And that's just it.
They watch this, learn something from it.
I hope so too, but but that's where as well, we maybe need some help as well, as far as being educated to know, what the appropriate thing is to do and to say, because hell, I mean, I think we're all guilty at one point or another of foot and mouth disease. It doesn't matter what you're specifically talking about or anything like that, but I think we've all done it at one time or another, and we've all been embarrassed by it. But that doesn't mean that we should stop trying, though, by any means.
I'm seeing a lot more women of color on calls, which is really great. Because I think it's that we're opening up for more women of color on crews, and they're doing they're on lighting crews or on audio crews, and I just think it's great.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing this sort of sense of camaraderie as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
I'd
like
also...
I've had younger women come up and talk to me about how I got in the industry and stuff, and talking a little bit and stuff. So I find that really great.
I would just kind of add to that too, that seeing more women of color on calls, but in general, seeing more women on calls, seeing more people of color on calls in general. Like, I feel like I would literally be surrounded by white males on every call for probably maybe the first 10 years of my career. You know what I mean? Seeing Deb sometimes was like oh, there's a woman that does this? Literally. Like, you're the only person I can actually think of from that time that I actually interacted with. And, it's so much more now. And on top of it, I mentioned young people, especially on the IA front, because I have lots of friends in the IA of all various ages, But when I started, like, they had a reputation of, you know, if you're going into an IA house, it's, you know, it's grumpy old guys and, you know, basically grumpy old white guys. And like, you see a lot of young people there, you know, again, more inclusivity, people of color, women,
Women and men.
Women and men.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge change, I would say, from when I started, where you wouldn't really see anybody that looks like you.
When I first met Debbie, I went, oh, there's another woman coming into the shop. I was excited because I was the only gal there. So I was, and then when Alyssa came in, this is great. I'm so excited. I mean, I love the guys that I worked with, but you know, sometimes, you know.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of women at Westbury in the day.
No.
Well, no, not in a technical sense. Like up front, there were all sorts.
Yeah, but I mean on the crew.
Yeah.
Like, at least when I was at Westbury, there was you and Alyssa. I think that's the only two women I remember being on the.
Yeah.
Yeah. Until I started working at CCR, I was at Stage Vision for about a decade or so, and I don't remember a single female tech.
It's kind
at
of
all.
weird.
Oh,
I was lucky 'cause
in
my
10
very
years?
first tour-
Wow.
In 10 years, yeah. You know, I mean,
my very first tour I did in the 80s, there were 3 women on the crew: a rigger, a lighting tech, and the set designer.
Yeah.
And this was like
Yeah.
back in 1988. So for me, it was always weird, you know, that there was such an issue about it. For me, it always was a non-issue because I grew up that way, right?
I think at least in Debbie's and Alyssa's case, the schools that we have, like Trevis and Harris, and the Fanshawe, they are there are more women applying to those courses, so they're coming out of those schools too, and we have a bigger pool to draw from, and that helps tremendously.
Yeah, I've definitely seen an increase in the amount.
Uh-oh.
Did we lose her?
When I went to Harris, like, oh, am I last?
No, we got you
froze up
now.
for a second.
Yeah,
No, I was saying, I've definitely seen an increase in the amount of women taking my live sound course at Harris, as opposed to when I went there 12 years ago. It was just me. So it's really inspiring to see more and more women actually applying.
Well, that's good to see because, I mean, yeah, it certainly has been a very male-dominated industry as a whole. There's no doubt about that. And yeah, I mean, you know, as far as it is with the white guys and stuff like that, yeah, I mean, I'm obviously white. You know, there's no hiding that. And yes, that's the way it's been for a long time. But
Actually,
that's why
right
it's
now
really
you're
nice
looking
to
a little
see that.
pink.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
But that's just my video eye saying
That's
that.
that's just my shitty sunburn, I'm sure. But you know, whatever the case. But you know, it has been nice to see though that, you know, yes, there's certainly been over the past, I'd say 5 to 7 years that I've noticed it, that there's been, you know, a lot more diversity within the industry as a whole. And you know, and to Adrian's point too about IATSE, you know, especially here in Toronto, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think there's some great people at IATSE, but for a very long time there was that feeling of like, oh, where's the gig? It's at the CNE grounds. And you're like, oh, IATSE, right? I think some of that has lifted a bit, you know, and I saw that starting even before they had the strikes and stuff like that, that happened, you know, the previous summer and stuff. But, you know, it seems to me that they've become more friendly just in general with outside companies coming in and working in their houses.
I remember
I've seen
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, you go ahead, Kate.
I remember IATSE 20 years ago in Toronto and coming in with a touring show, and you didn't know if it was hands off, you could even touch your own gear.
Yeah.
And 10 years ago, I did a project it's been the O'Keefe Center, the Hummingbird Center, whatever it is nowadays. And I did a project, and it was a completely different vibe. It was a much easier place to walk into and not feel like you were imposing upon the local crew. It felt like they were including you. And that's 10 years ago.
I think it's more the C&E from what I personally think of, you know, as far as in my experiences. But I'd like I said, it has changed for the better. And I'm very glad to see that. And I don't know if that's just because we got younger as far as the labor force, or possibly some of those other people that maybe did make the environment incredibly difficult to work in, possibly got to that age where they did retire or just go on to something different. Hard to say, but regardless, it is nice to see that it has changed somewhat.
As a person who's been actively approached a couple of times, it seems that IA is making a conscious effort to try and hire more diverse crew.
Yeah,
That's good
most
to hear.
definitely.
I would say the Halifax local, we have a lot of different people in our membership. There's plenty of women, there's plenty of people of color. You know, there's younger and older. I love the group of people I get to work with in Halifax with the IA itself.
I've had really good experiences in Halifax too with IA. The crew lead, Debbie, I can't remember her last name.
Debbie
Yeah.
Richardson and Colin.
Debbie Richardson is fantastic and has always been really, really eager to work with us and help us out.
I'm surprised you don't have her on this.
Well, that's maybe for another day, but yeah, no, in my experience.
This is how we nominate people at Grumpy.
Exactly. That's exactly what's happening right now.
It wasn't me.
Just give them a shout out and they can't back down anymore.
Debbie, you had a question that I think you mentioned to me about wanting to ask Pauline about her, was it Sound Girls or something like that?
Yeah, Pauline, I just wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit. I sort of want to backtrack a little bit and talk about the history of, you know, women in the field, and sort of have like, you've been around for 30 years. So let's just talk about what's become better, what's become easier. Has anything in particular become worse? And also, like when you and I started, that was before the internet, if anybody can imagine that. So now that you've been involved in Sound Girls, can you talk a little bit about how there's more platforms for people that want to find out, like women, or a more inclusive workforce to get into it and find out about it than we had when we first started back in those days?
Okay. Well, when I started, I think it was like 84. I was just basically thrown into it. I didn't, there wasn't, as you said, the internet, and I didn't know about all these recording schools, but I volunteered. It's no longer around, with a volunteer organization called Womanly Way Productions, run by a wonderful woman, Ruth Dorwin. And basically it was a production, we would put on productions in local spaces, but mostly by the St. Paul's Trinity, where the old, well, for people who live in Toronto, where the old Lamaquays used to be, that there was that church there. And we would bring in, we would do festivals there, we would do plays there. But the thing was, all the crews were women, like the whole production, from the lighting, or then we didn't have very much video, but we had the audio, to the end. We would rent the equipment and we would set everything up. And I volunteered there for like 5 years, and that's how I got my toes wet in the audio industry. And then I went to Humber for a 16-week program to do theater production. And so it was 8 weeks in the class. You learn all the aspects, the technical aspects of theater. And then we had to do an eight-week placement, and I did my placement at Westbury, and then I was hired after that, and once again thrown into the pool and sink or swim. And so, you know, I would ask tons of questions. And my Bible was the Yamaha Reinforcement Handbook. I would steal any manual, like any manual for like mixers, and I bring it home and I read them cover to cover. So when I got back to work, that I could understand the technical part of it. Like I knew the basics. I knew what a mic cable was, and I knew how to plug everything in. But all the other stuff, I basically learned on the job. Like I learned how to repair speakers, and now and then as I moved up, like as the technology got more involved, I would still do the same thing, because once again there was no internet. Bring manuals home and ask lots of questions and try and do hands-on stuff. And I think now that there's such a wealth of information, like you can't say, well, I don't know how to do that, because it's just not true, because there's online seminars, there's tons of books now that I could point, like if I'm approached by anyone, I said, well, here, why don't you try this? Why don't you go to this website? Why don't you go to this YouTube video? Why don't you go to, or they could just talk to me. And I think in how I got involved with the Toronto Sound Girls, I think I was on Facebook, and Carrie Keys, who was the monitor engineer for Pearl Jam for like 20 years, and another woman, Michelle, can't remember her last name. They started this organization called Sound Girls, and it's just an amazing organization. They have chapters of all over the world, in Europe, in Australia, in the States, in Canada. Me and another woman, Maxine, were co-heads of the Toronto chapter, and it was, we still don't know why, but it was difficult getting it going here in the city. There is an active chapter in Vancouver at the moment, but certainly we would like to, get that up and going again, because I'm meeting more and more, even like as old as 9 years old. I work with the Girls Rock Camp. I'm their technical person, and it's so cute when you have I'm sitting behind the mixer, and a 9 or 8 year old girl comes up and shyly says, "Can you what are you doing?" Right? And I have them work on the faders. Okay, touch that fader and push it up slowly, and they're really concentrating, like they're just trying to push it up. And it's just a thrill to be mentoring like that. And so over the last 30 years, the technology has exploded. Like we've gone from big W bins and speakers to the size of cars, to something that you can basically carry in a trunk. Digital consoles, the big heritages, down to a console that I can run off my iPad. The changes just have been lightning fast, and I think it's been great. And I hope I continue us you know, being a part of this evolution or process that's going on, and with people like Deb and Alyssa, it certainly is been easier, because I can, you know, I have they have, there's people that say, oh, well, you know, well, if they can do it, I can do it too, type of thing, right?
Absolutely.
And we have to make an environment in our workplaces which sort of reflect what's been happening out, like the workplace has always reflected what's been happening in society, and now the workplace has to be ready to whenever we go back, it has to be ready to implement some of those changes that are going to be coming. I know that they're going to be coming, especially with this what's been happening over the last few weeks. And
yeah, I think you're right. Like, the industry will have to reinvent itself anyways, and you know,
yeah,
what better time to implement these
exactly
necessary changes,
Yes.
right? I totally
Couldn't
agree
agree
with
more.
Pauline. And
It's-
you know,
it's-
anything we can do to help, we'll try to do.
oh, definitely. And it's almost as if somebody's in the universe said, okay, let's just pause. Let's just put the world on pause and let their people get all their shit together, and then, you know, we'll start it up again, type of thing. So
I really hope that we take this chance, though, to make this constructive. You know,
oh,
not just
definitely, yeah.
not just sit idly by and just say, "Well, that was great." You know, there's all the stuff that we talked about when we were quarantined, but you know, now nothing's happened, right?
Yeah,
You know,
But,
for the
I mean,
first time in recorded history, the show must not go on.
yeah, exactly. But you know, this could
Yeah.
also be a good
Well,
launching ground. This could also be a good launching ground should you want to bring back the Sound Girls to Toronto.
Mhm.
By, you know, we can easily promote it on our channel right here. For that
Okay.
matter, it's a great cause by the sounds of it, and anything that involves mentorship, which is something that I think all of us from one point or another have greatly benefited to get to where we are in our careers today. Even if we're not currently working at them, as much as that sucks, you know, we all got to have that. So yeah, I mean, maybe we can do a little plug for that maybe at the end of the show, and make it as possible, like maybe a commercial or something like that for you.
Oh, for
Okay,
sure.
great.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
We'll definitely do that. You know, we'll make your a nice little commercial spot for you that we can kind of tag onto the show. I mean, the whole point, you know, of creating this channel was so we can kind of share what we learned and share with people that we might not normally have a chance to interact with, that can kind of, you know, benefit from what we benefited from, basically, where we can be like mentors to people on a distance, since we can't do it on site right now. So let's do it virtually, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I was hoping at some point, you know, that we can also do videos like training videos and mentorship videos on different parts of the industry, you know, tips and tricks that you don't read in a book, you know, the stuff that we learned on the road. Like Pauline said, you know, you learn most of your stuff on the job. And I think we all realize that, looking back, that what we knew going in was almost insignificant to what we've learned since that time, right?
Pauline, you
absolutely.
said you were at Humber
Yeah,
College.
you know, you can only learn that on the job. And so if we can kind of share some of that knowledge with our audience, you know, that'd be awesome.
Go ahead, Katie.
Pauline, you said you were at Humber College for a theater tech program in the 80s?
Yeah.
And it was 16 weeks. I took the program in the late 80s, and it was a 2-year program. It had just been a 3-year program, and then switched it to 2 years.
Well, this was I wasn't working at the time, so this was through the government. It was like an employment program, and so they paid. So while you were taking the program, it was like a training program. So while I was it was learning. It was a lot of fun because I know that you and Debbie and Adrian and Alyssa know I met Dan McLean because he was at the same time. He was in the music program, and so we would provide production support for when they have their concerts and stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I think since Katie's in, if I could just jump in, this is a fascinating story to talk to you, Katie. So you started your career as a male and then publicly transitioned to female. And I have to jump in. So I came through Casino Nova Scotia with one band, whoever it was, and you were Dan, a man lighting person.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came back some other time.
Can I just point out, like, you used my former name, and amongst my friends and anybody, I think I mentioned at one point, there's a lot of things you can't talk about to some trans people, and their former name is some people have issues listening to hear their old name. I don't. And because I've spoken to you, Deb, about things like that, I don't have a problem with it. So I just want to point out that, like, if you know somebody in transition, you have to be careful about using their former names and obviously their former pronouns, because some people don't have good memories or just want to forget that time of their life. Whereas I look at it as if my life as Daniel is exactly the reason why I am Catherine or Kate today. So I just wanted to point that out. Sorry.
No, that's great. And it's interesting for me, the first time that I met you as Katie, I didn't know how to treat you. I thought, well, normally with a guy, I would pat you on the back. Hey, dude, great show. You're a great lighting guy. And I thought, I can't say that anymore. So even as a woman, I've had to learn that about being respectful and more inclusive. But can you give us some perspective from your history about maybe discrimination you're getting now as a female that you didn't get, or just transgender in general? Because I know you have lots to say.
I never thought I'd be on a tour bus again, and wouldn't you know, within a year I was on a bus. The only reason it took a year is because the projects I work, that was the time frame. That was a whole new experience of having to be on a bus with a bunch of males and then actually being the one, or in one case, two females on a tour bus, was mind-blowing. But the groups I work with were amazing. The good old boys. You get into some of these venues where it's all slightly older generation, and yeah, there was talked down to, there was dismissed. I had been brought into an out-of-market arena to do the head rigging, because I do ground rigging at my local, and I was brought in to be the head rigger because that venue didn't have one, and it was a complex show. The touring rigger and one of the local riggers wouldn't even acknowledge me until coffee break, as I said earlier. Coffee break is usually that magic when they get that all the math I've done and all the rigging I've done was done once, and they didn't have to redo it. I know what I'm doing. As a male, I wouldn't have to prove that. At the moment I walked in and I'm the head rigger, I'm the head rigger. But I had to have a touring rigger say, well, is there somebody locally who can do this better than you?
Wow.
Oh.
It happens. So the fun ones are, I look at more of the positives I've had. I use a lot of them as learning experiences. Not that I want to educate somebody with a fist sometimes, but the idea that, like, every experience, if somebody misgenders me, if somebody calls me sir, I say, well, do you know where I come from? Sirs don't look like this. And that's a more of a lighter, more positive way to gently correct somebody, instead of getting, you just misgendered me, now I'm going to lose my mind and have a bad day. I always try to turn it to be a positive. Yeah, there's a little culture shock. There's sticker shock, definitely, when a 6'1", 200+ pound Amazon walks into a job site and they're not expecting it in South Florida. I'm a Tramazon, by the way.
That's awesome.
for Amazon.
I
I
love
love that. That's
That
awesome.
is totally awesome.
Great.
You'll have to spell that for me so I can put it in your lower third.
Humor has been my savior, but I've also, as a trans person, I've had the support that a lot of trans people don't get. I am lucky that I was established in my career. And I was told that by a few of my employers. I would not have necessarily been employable
Right.
if I didn't have the background I had as Daniel to back me
Right.
up.
Yeah.
I had somebody ask me on a job site, does this mean like we have to worry about you hitting on the guys? I'm like, no, I don't like guys. I want to do my job. I'm here to work. I've had people ask me, does it affect my work? Well, no, I still do lighting design or, some build video walls or whatever set elements I'm doing. I can do that the same. I just look a little different, a little more happier. So, yeah.
I think that's fantastic.
Mhm.
And it kind of leads to kind of the next question that we have that we wanted to hear from everybody. And that is, we know that there can be systemic problems in our industry as far as when it comes to both racism and gay rights, or however you want to look at it. Do you feel that it's an actual problem in the industry, or do you feel that at this point that we've moved forward enough that it's really just on a case by case or person by person kind of issue?
It's person by person, absolutely person by person. I'll look to older generation, people older than myself, and people will say, well, they'll have a trouble getting used to you. There are people who are my parents' age who grasp it immediately. And then there are people my age who don't grasp it at all. So it's it's definitely not just, you can't generally say everybody. You can just say it's a person by person. It's going to be, an educational experience one by one. And not everybody's going to get it immediately. Some people it takes an hour, some people it takes a day. One of my friends, who I still consider my friend, and he's awesome now about it, it took him several months just to get used to it. So on a touring situation, it's hard. You got to get in and get your job done. So that's why the jokes come out and it's a quick, let's get her done. And then we could talk about things like that at coffee or breaks. But
Absolutely.
Throughout the entire industry, I did this several years ago, and I've seen the changes and I've seen the positive way it's affecting. You're talking about more women of color, more men of color, more people of color. It's take away the categorize. We're just all people. So there's just more people, diverse people. And that's what's great about the industry. It's always been this way. It's just now it seems to be more in the forefront.
So I guess another question, not to get away from this initial one, but I'm sure that all of you at one point or another have to handle inappropriate comments from either crew mates or even clients for that matter. And, I think it would be really great for our audience to know, how do you go about just navigating that in a way that, you, yes, correct them, but at the same time remain professional, and that, it's not something that they would look down upon as far as, well, I would never do it again because of this. If you understand kind of where I'm going with this, I may be getting a little bit tongue-tied. And if I am, then I'm very, very sorry.
I think to tie both of your questions together, there are some places where discrimination is more accepted than other places. So depending on where you are and where you're working, an example, I spent some time in West Virginia, and working in West Virginia is a lot different than working in Toronto or working in San Francisco or working in New York. There's something I say all the time, that there's the East Coast and there's the West Coast and there's a whole lot in the middle. And I had some issues where I had a stagehand that didn't really want to do anything that I had asked him to do. And eventually what ended up happening was we ended up with his steward, and basically, or not basically, literally, he said he didn't see why he has to take instructions from an N-word.
Oh my God.
No
So-
way.
Jeez. I've heard the N word before in the States too. I can't say that I have in Canada, but
So
please continue.
But going forward from that, it's to say that you're gonna correct somebody or to do something, it's a systemic problem in that location. Whereas you're trying to get a show up, and you don't have a lifetime of change to put into that individual that's kind of in your way of putting the show up.
Yeah, but what you're saying is it's like a regional specific problem, not an industry specific problem.
Right. I mean, and I'm not saying that it doesn't exist in some places at all, and I'm not saying that it strictly exists in some places either. But even to go forward from that, the person, realized that he shouldn't have used that language. So he backed up and he used what he felt was more politically correct. And he said, okay, well, I'm really sorry, but do you think it would be okay if I'm not placed with a colored person then? And to him, that was taking a step back and being more politically correct. And I can't be there to educate that person. I just have to understand that that's where that person is. And that person actually got excused for that day, and that person went home. But at the same time, there's not always the opportunity to educate, as you were.
So I'm curious to know, Adrian, in that specific instance, do you feel that the steward actually did the right thing as far as correcting the situation and listening to what it was that was happening? Like, or is there another
I feel like
possibility that you could have done that would have made it better?
Details about the actual gig, I think, to be honest, my usual reaction to things like this is to mostly stay quiet, which is not necessarily a correct reaction, but it's the reaction that I've practiced for most of my life. But I feel like there were more of my colleagues that were offended more of my colleagues that were offended by what had transpired, who actually wanted to do something about it, and more of my white colleagues, and you know what I mean, as opposed to, which is almost sad to say that myself as a black person didn't stand up for racism against black people, but my white colleagues that were around me did. But I just didn't have. I've dealt with instances like that throughout time. So in my head, it's just like, well, I just don't have time to deal with this guy. And there's still 4 more delay towers to put up. And,
you just want to get it done more than anything at that point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting to actually even have this conversation, because then you have a look back at yourself as to, well, should I have done that in that instance, or should I have not done that in that instance? And usually as time goes by, you just sort of just go through every experience from experience to experience and go through it and not necessarily reflect. So another good thing that's even good about this conversation and this show is just the reflection that I think some of us can have just by actually speaking about some of these things.
Yeah. I definitely understand that sort of quietness that you get, and that censorship that you can get in those moments when you're like, do I speak out? Do I get angry in this moment? Is this going to be helpful? One of the things that I've noticed with a lot of folks who are either like people of color or women or just minorities in the industry is like the way in which they navigate these issues is fascinating. And it all happens in like a split second because these interactions are so fast and they're very important. These peer relationships in the moment, because you're trying to get this gig done, is so important that you keep these good relationships, that you're just constantly running through your mind, like, what is the right thing to say? And as you said, educating people, you don't always have the time to do so. But one of the things that I've been trying to do in recent years is kind of adding a little bit of that playfulness that Kate was talking about, and just like a sprinkle of education in there to like maybe get them to step into your shoes for a second. So like, obviously nowhere near as extreme as someone using the N-word, but you know, I had a touring crew member come into my venue and call me sweetie. And I was like, okay, maybe this is an endearing thing. I let it pass once. Then they gave me an order and said sweetie while they did it. And I kind of like chuckled and I was like, okay, but as long as you never call me sweetie again. And he looked really confused. And I was like, would you call him sweetie? And I like pointed to my male coworker and he's like, no, that's weird. And I'm like, right? And you just get these like kind of like funny little like, oh yeah, what I said was kind of like weird and messed up and I didn't realize, and then the joke's done and over. But you kind of taught them a little lesson in that half second. And those are really, really hard to do. But it's those little like, you play it off as a bit of a joke, but you're also educating. Those I've been finding have been super helpful. But it's shitty that it kind of has to be put on us to teach people about that. You know?
I was going to say, it's shitty that you even have to think about those kind of issues when you're trying to focus on doing your job, you know, and then you're forced to preoccupy your mind with how do I deal with this person's limitations, or you know, do I speak up, or do I educate him and take time off my mind off the job to kind of correct the situation, or do I just ignore it and just power through it, right?
It's almost like you have another full-time job on top of your other job.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, that goes with any kind of ignorance you're dealing with at the workplace, right? Regardless of what or who it's aimed at. As soon as you have to kind of deal with teaching or fixing somebody just so you can do your job, it's a problem. And it's sad that that problem exists, right?
But I feel like as technicians as a whole, we're already kind of equipped for that. We kind of adjust our language and our behavior based on band or local crew. You figure out, do these people swear a lot? Do they not swear a lot? Like, what's their vibe? And you kind of shift your behavior and your language around them. And then I find that the minority folk in the industry kind of do that to a little bit more of extreme level. So I feel like in some way we're equipped, but the women and people of color in the industry just kind of have to do it a little harder.
Wow.
Fair enough.
Now, one thing that we were going to get into as well, and Debbie, I'll let you take over for this, but I want to kind of focus too on some of the certain pronouns that exist, and just kind of to get everyone's opinion on that. Debbie, why don't you go ahead?
Well, obviously, Katie called me out on that, so we'll start with Katie. So what is the correct thing to do, and especially if you're meeting someone and you're not sure what is the right thing to say, like, you know, and what pronouns should we use? And then we'll go to Roz after we go to Katie, I think, because we could.
In some ways, it should be pretty easy to see. On a job site, men and women are wearing trousers, pants of some sorts. Usually, you know, if you're working for the IA, ideally you're wearing your IA bug or the corporate logo of whoever you're working for, whether, you know, Solotech, Christie Lights, or any of those awesome companies out there, Canadian companies.
Go Canada.
And, but it's the, if I'm on a job site and it's harder to tell, but my body shaping is a little different than a male's, but I still have male quality. I still have somewhat of a male voice. I'm working on that. But I wear earrings usually. I like the long dangly earrings. I usually have lipstick. I don't wear a lot of makeup. I'm not that kind of a person. Those should be clue enough to say, oh, this person doesn't want to be called sir or he. So sometimes I will introduce myself as, you know, hi, I'm Kate. I use she and her as my pronouns, moving on. Sometimes I get into a venue, say, lower in the United States. And I'll just introduce myself as KT and roll with it for the rest of the day. You have to, like, I think it was Alyssa was saying, you have to roll with your crowd, who you're working with that day. How am I going to maximize the work output from this crew? But generally speaking, I do use the sense of humor to correct mild corrections towards pronouns that aren't what I would prefer to hear. And I'm finding more and more often that people will be respectful enough to ask, because I'm Kate. I had somebody say, I've never met a man named Kate before. And I went, oh, well, you still haven't. Later on, he apologized, and he was actually really wonderful, but like this person had never met. Like you say, Deb, how do I deal with a person? I've never dealt with a transgender person before. You treat him like a person. You don't know something, ask politely. That's it, right?
Yeah, but on that point, so how forgiving are you if somebody stumbles up with the pronouns? Like, unless, like you say, you introduce yourself with your preferred pronouns, which is great. I personally, as a guy, you know, who's always insecure about the pronoun parts, regardless of, you know, my level of tolerance and exposure to the thing, but I still get confused with all the pronouns. I just can't keep track of it. You know what I mean? I admit it. So I'd love if anybody introduces themselves with their preferred pronoun. That would make my life a lot easier.
But it may be, the problem would be is like some school institutions are saying, okay, well, at the beginning of your first year, you introduce yourself as, hi, I'm Kate. I use she and her as my pronouns, you know, and everybody goes around the room and everyone does that. Doesn't matter if you're cisgender. Do you understand the term cis versus trans? Yeah. Okay. So a cis person, you know, will use the same introduction, and that way it doesn't become awkward when the non-binary, the trans person who people are still questioning, you know, the old joke Saturday Night Live about Pat, you know.
Oh,
you
wow.
know,
Still.
Like, it's still out there.
Wow.
I don't even want to talk about all of that stuff in the past, but it's there, but I don't know. It's just try to make it easier.
Well, Roz, do you want to maybe talk about, because I know in your introduction, you were using the pronoun they. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm non-binary, so I kind of just float somewhere in the middle. I actually kind of thank the production industry for kind of allowing me to discover that side of myself. Because femininity was kind of looked down upon. I really brought out my more masc side. Am I cutting out again?
You did for a second, but you're back.
Yeah, because of the fact that femininity was. Oh, I'm back. Fantastic.
Yep.
Oh, and she's cutting out again.
I was saying the production industry sort of allowed to. Oh, okay, hold on. Sorry, let me just see. One sec. One sec.
We all need better internet.
Not quite. I know. Let me see if I can jump.
Okay. Well, in the interest of time, while Roz is figuring things out with the rig, we're gonna move on. That's not to discount the question or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. I still need to be educated on the subject because I still am not. I mean, yeah, like I said, because what I usually do if I'm unsure, I either avoid using pronouns at all by just rephrasing my words, or I just listen till somebody uses them, engage the reaction if that was the right or the wrong one, until I can kind of zero in on which is the right ones to use.
I think certainly one thing that could help with all of this is, of course, like it's great that we have people that are now within like in managerial positions and leadership positions for younger generations that may be going through a transition of sorts or identifies as something other than just, you know, male or female, to have these people in the industry to be, you know, looked upon as how, you know, we should be treating people moving forward. And it has to start at the top as far as that's concerned. And I really wonder if companies are doing enough to really educate and hire people, of all backgrounds, so that, the playing field is a little bit more level than what we know it to be as just the white guy. Anyways, okay. We'll move on. We'll move on here. But Roz, are you back there now?
Yeah, I just want to see if my connection's better.
Yeah,
Yes,
it seems to
good.
be.
All right. Sorry about that. I live in a house full of streaming people, so.
You said screaming, right?
Yes, that too. It's COVID. Everyone's screaming. Yeah, no. What I was gonna say earlier was, yeah, this industry sort of like helped me or allowed for me to kind of explore a more masked side of myself, because femininity was sort of like down upon, and I actually was able to explore the side of me that most would call to be more male, and over the years kind of figured out I was non-binary, and so that really tied into the workplace and how I was being treated by others. I think part of it also tied into the fact that I wasn't treated well as a female sound tech for so long, wanting to be treated as an equal. So at work, I prefer they, them. I'm totally fine if someone messes up and uses she. I'm a little awkward, and I don't like to correct people as much as I probably should. I haven't corrected a lot of folk. What I've been trying to do is use they, them when referring to myself, and use they, them in my email signature, which a lot of folks are starting to adapt, both cis and otherwise, are just starting to put like their name, their pronoun, their phone number, and what they do in their email signature. And I've been finding that companies are adapting that as well. So that's been sort of helpful. But for me, I prefer they, them. I'm really lenient with someone if they accidentally use she. I kind of try and lightly mention it later in the day, but I feel like maybe I need to be a little bit more confident in correcting folk, but I constantly worry about how it's going to affect my working relationship. But I think that's something that I'm
Yeah, I
I'm
think
worried
in this,
about. It's
I
my own
think in
stuff.
this day and age, basically we're at the stage where basically just tell us what to call you. You know, if you want to be called apple pie or whatever, no problem. Just tell us. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
because you're not dealing with ill will, you're dealing with lack of knowledge or ignorance, right?
Totally,
So basically,
totally.
at least in most cases, from what I've been hearing and observing, you know, so like just coming out and just educating people about it, you know, up front, like you said, using it in your email and referring to yourself, just makes it a lot easier for people, you know, to not put their foot in their mouth.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
I think the funniest thing is just, I've had instances where both the front of house and monitor and lighting tech were all non-male technicians, and they're like, shout out to the sound guys and the lighting guy, or just super awkward stuff like that, and you're just like, oh my god. Yeah, no, it's honestly like, for me, I don't take it too hard trying to lightly educate folks. I'm lucky enough to live in a city that's very liberal and forward thinking. So I have the space to do so, but you know, for folks who are touring through certain parts of the States, I can understand how difficult that would be.
Hey, Roz, since you were already talking to you anyway, I know in introduction you talked about active planning for diversity. Can you give some suggestions on what we can all do and what we need to do in our industry?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been doing personally, so I'm an instructor at Harris Institute. I teach the digital live sound course. So one of the things that I do in my class is, if I notice that there's a person of color or a woman or any minority in the industry, I kind of like give a little bit of an extra, like, hey, if you want to hop on a gig with me, if you want to shadow me, you know, or if you're looking to shadow in another part of the industry, I can connect you. Like, I kind of go a little bit out of my way to help those people. I work really hard to create communities, networks of technicians who are positive, lovely humans to work with, who are happy to mentor people and just sort of like connect them with the right folks. So outside of a production company, I'm trying to create this sort of community where mentorship opportunities or job opportunities are available. And over the last, I'd say like 3 or 4 years, I've successfully been able to get a few women and a few people of color positions and get them like started on tours and stuff, and see the community really like lift them up as well. So I think that both in a production company or in a tour, or even in just the sort of like network of technicians that we all kind of build for ourselves, really actively trying to pull in people who would normally not have the space, to just make a little bit more space for them and really give them the resources that they need. And that's sort of what we need to be doing right now, is just actually pulling apart and making space for folks and giving them proper resources. And the response has been fantastic, honestly.
That's great to hear. I actually kind of wish right about now that we had like an owner or two of some AV companies,
Yeah,
to be able to hear this kind of thing. And like, I know that for me, I will be promoting this episode to the people that I work with, and I really hope that you guys do as well.
Yeah, and
to
maybe we
get
can
the word
them
out
in a
on this.
future episode. I'd love
Yeah.
that if we can get some of the heads of the companies, and that would be awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Because we've talked about a lot here, and I mean, let's face it, we could go on for hours and hours, but we are running a bit long, so we are going to wrap things up for now. I know personally that I've learned a lot from this episode, and I really hope that our viewers have as well. All of you have just been fantastic, so thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure to be here.
yeah.
It's been great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I'd like to thank you all for being here as well, and I look forward to doing a lot more like relevant content, and I hope to work with you guys again. And like I said earlier, feel free, to bring ideas to us, what you think we should talk about, and pitch show ideas. We'd love to do it. We're looking for stuff to do, we got nothing else to do, no shows, no tours, so let's do our own shows is what I'm saying right now, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, we got time.
yeah, thank you all and for being here. It's been great. And to all our viewers at home, subscribe, click likes, and all that other crap that YouTubers are supposed to say. You know the deal, right? And yeah, see you next time on Grumpy Roadie Shop Talk.
Just remember, folks, Grumpy Roadie YouTube channel. Subscribe for all future episodes. Please visit us at www.grumpyroadie.com for news articles and forums. We're on Facebook as well, so please take a moment just to like us. It's only a click. It's not a big deal. Thanks again for everyone for today's participation. I want to give it a special thanks to Debbie Hutchins, who brought this idea to us and did a fantastic job. So thanks so much, everyone. And remember the golden rule: treat others as you wish to be treated. Thanks, everyone, again. We hope to see you again soon. Bye.